That the Prime Minister painted about the future of Slovakia. However, I'm sad from one regard because you haven't mentioned the future of the Hungarian minority where I belong, and even you mentioned that I can't argue against that the Hungarian minority rights don't meet the European criteria. It's true, and we have political representation. Still, as a member of the Hungarian minority, I feel very bad because the number of Hungarians are decreasing very fastly and very steadily. We can't really trust our Hungarian leaders, we can't really trust the Hungarian institutions, and actually I never met any Hungarian who liked all parties, and we don't feel that we were supported by the government, or we feel quite abandoned. So I just would like to ask that if you were Hungarian in Slovakia, then what would you do to make your community be a good member of Slovakia and a happy and contributing member?
Thank you very much. Ďakujem za otázku. Predovšetkým, a myslím to vážne chcem oceniť, príspevok, ktorý robia príslušníci všetkých národností menšín vrátane maďarskej pre rozvoj Slovenskej republiky.
Thank you for this question. First of all, and I'm really serious, I would like to highly appreciate the contribution of all national minorities, including Hungarian minority, to the development of Slovakia.
Som rád, že ste priznali, alebo sám uviedli, že štandardy postavenia príslušníkov národnostných menšín sú v poriadku.
I'm glad that you admitted and you said so that the position of national minorities in Slovakia meet all international standards.
Z takejto pozície sa dá veľmi konštruktívne postupovať ďalej.
From such a position we can really proceed further in a constructive way.
Pokúsim sa odpovedať na otázku, ktorú ste mi postavili. Čo by som robil, keby som bol Maďar na Slovensku? Aby som ešte zlepšil postavenie Maďara.
I will try and answer your question. What I would do if I were Hungarian in Slovakia, what I would do to improve our position.
Určite by som robil všetko preto, aby bola zachovaná identita národnostnej menšiny.
I would certainly do everything possible to preserve our national identity.
To znamená v oblasti kultúry, v oblasti literatúry, jednoducho všade tam, kde národnostná menšina sa čím si odlišuje od štátotvorného slovenského národa.
In the field of culture, literature, simply said in all fields where national minority has something different from the majority.
Ale na to sú na Slovensku vytvorené výborné podmienky.
For this, Slovakia has created excellent...
Thank you. Tomáš Haláček, I'm a Slovak living and working in London these days. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for a very detailed presentation. Could I ask you to clarify one point? You said at one point that some democratic standards have been set very high. We are now more people than the Pope. Could I ask you to clarify that? Because there is a suggestion that one way of interpreting it is there is a trade-off between political freedoms and social justice, with the implication being that political freedoms may have to be curtailed in order to bring about social justice. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. We Slovaks do that too often. So in the spirit of avoiding miscommunication, which you appealed to earlier today, can I ask you to clarify the point and say exactly what you mean by that?
Yes, of course. Toto je tendencia typická nielen pre Slovensko, ale pre všetky krajiny, ktoré sa po roku 1989 v našom regióne transformovali.
This is a trend typical not only for Slovakia, but for all countries in our region which went through a transformation after 1989.
Často sa nastavovali štandardy formálno-právne veľmi vysoko, bez toho, aby možno bola zabezpečená ich praktická realizácia v živote.
Very often standards were set too high on a theoretical or legislative level. However, there were no practical measures to implement them into real life.
Často bol rozdiel medzi, ako sa práve hovorí, law in books and law in practice.
And very often there was a difference between law in books and law in practice.
Ja by som napríklad uviedol na Slovensku oblasť prístupu k informáciám.
I would give you one example. In Slovakia, it is the access to information.
Zákon, ktorý je prijatý v tejto oblasti, je tak vysoko nastavený.
And our law adopted in this field is set very high.
Že niekedy môže spôsobovať až praktické problémy výkonu štátnej administratívy.
That occasionally it may cause practical problems in its implementation.
To engage with us and to talk to us. Before we finalise the morning, I'd like to invite Dr. Robin Hazelwood, who is the director of the School of Slavonic and East European Studies at UCL, to...
My pleasure as the director of the UCL School of Slavonic and East European Studies to propose a vote of thanks to His Excellency the Prime Minister, Dr. Fico, for this inaugural UCL BASI UCL lecture. Before I do so, I'd like to say a few other thanks. First of all to BASI, to the organisation, to its members, and especially to Lord Radice and Nicholas Gerald, who joined with us in quite a long but eventually fruitful marriage to bring the BASI name to UCL so that we can continue its work through this lecture, which will be an annual event from now on. I'd also like to thank the Prime Minister's office, the Ambassador, his staff at the Embassy, UCL Development Office, the Provost's Office, and my own staff at CEAS for all the work that they've put in to make this event take place and to make it run so smoothly. And finally, I'd like to mention that you're all very welcome, please, to come for a buffet lunch to the UCL School of Slavonic and East European Studies on Taverton Street after this event. Before I go on to give my thanks to Dr. Fico, however, and with his enthusiastic agreement, I would like to ask you to add a note or two to your applause in honour of one of the most eminent or distinguished, as the Provost used earlier this morning, professors in the school's history, namely Robert Pinsent, who's sitting here, Emeritus Professor of Czech and Slovak Literature, who retired this year. And I'd like to take that occasion, I have the full support of the Prime Minister and the Provost, to thank him and to honour him for his work. The Prime Minister mentioned R.W. Seton Watson, who was indeed one of the founding figures of the school, but we have a very distinguished history of the study of Slovak language and literature since then as well. You may not know, indeed, that another good reason why the Prime Minister should have spoken in Slovak today is that this university, UCL, is the only university in the West where students may choose to study a degree in Slovak language and literature. But to return to today's lecture. The school was founded approaching 100 years ago on the vision of R.W. Seton Watson, but also on the vision of T.G. Masaryk, that, in Masaryk's words, small nations were and are a vital part of Europe's future. Masaryk's vision may be revisited, perhaps it can be questioned, but it certainly doesn't go away. Europe, too, is often represented, misrepresented perhaps, in terms of arcane procedures or narrow horizons. But Europe is, or should be, about ideas that matter in the widest arenas. And Dr. Fico, in his speech, has eloquently shown us how and why that is. Thank you, Prime Minister, for giving the inaugural UCL BASI UCL lecture today at UCL, and on such a significant day, 17th of November, for Slovakia, in this 20th anniversary of 1989, and the enormous transformative effect that that month, that year, had on the globe, and had on Europe, and had on the nations of Europe. Finally, we wish you well, and your country well, in your celebrations of this day, this evening, and through the day. Thank you very much, Prime Minister.